A woman's body, dumped in the brush off a remote highway, her eyes wide open, a ligature mark carved deep into her throat. No ID, no witnesses, no trace of who she was or who killed her. Then, months later, a message scrawled on a filthy truck stop wall. "I killed Taunja Bennett." Beneath it, a smiley face. What kind of killer admits to murder in a public restroom and then dares the world to stop him? This is the story of a man who murdered for control, craved recognition, and turned his crimes into a game with law enforcement. His name is Keith Jesperson, but you may know him better as the Smiley Face Killer. It began with a body. On a cold January morning in 1990, a man pulled off Interstate 84 near the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon. He needed a moment of privacy, nothing more. But as he stepped into the brush, a strange unease crept in. The thicket was silent, too still. Then he saw it. A pale leg, stiffened unnaturally. Just beyond, partially hidden beneath damp leaves, lay the lifeless body of a young woman. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the gray sky above. Her face was pale, lips parted in a frozen gasp. She wore a red long-sleeved top and faded jeans, though the fabric on one leg had been roughly torn, as if yanked or cut during a struggle. Around her neck, a deep ligature mark discolored the skin. It was unmistakable. She had been strangled. The scene was quiet, but it screamed of violence. The medical examiner's report would later confirm what the visual evidence already suggested. She had died of asphyxiation. There were signs of sexual assault. Bruises lined her arms and collarbone. Defensive wounds were scattered along her knuckles, subtle but clear. The body showed no signs of decomposition, placing her death within the previous 48 hours. There was no ID, no purse, no personal belongings. Just the body and the silence of the trees. One clue stood out. The torn fabric on her jeans. A strip had been cleanly removed, deliberately. The killer had taken something with him. Investigators quickly determined that the location was not the primary crime scene. There was no blood, no signs of a fight, no disturbed soil or drag marks nearby. The body had been dumped here post-mortem. The killer knew the area, or at least knew enough to choose a quiet, remote stretch of wilderness where he wouldn't be seen. For 3 days, the woman remained nameless. Then, a mother watching the local news recognized the red blouse. Her daughter, Taunja Bennett, had worn it the night she disappeared. She had left home to meet a friend at a local bar. She never returned. Bennett was 23, young, trusting, socially vulnerable. She lived with her mother, had mild cognitive challenges, and enjoyed going out. She wasn't the type to run away. Her last known location was a bar near Interstate 5, over 70 kilometers from where her body was found. Staff at the bar remembered her. They recalled her laughing, playing pool with a man described as unusually tall, nearly 2 meters. No one remembered his name, and there were no security cameras. The man was a ghost, his presence marked only by second-hand memories. Then, unexpectedly, a break came, though not from physical evidence. A woman named Laverne Pavlinac called police and claimed to know what happened. She implicated her boyfriend, John Sosnovsky, saying he had confessed to her in a fit of rage. Over the following weeks, her story grew more elaborate. She described how they had abducted Taunja, assaulted her, and dumped her body near the gorge. Laverne even produced a piece of denim she said John had kept as a trophy. Most shockingly, she led detectives to the very spot where Taunja's body had been found, despite that location never being publicly released. The case appeared solved. John was arrested. Laverne eventually claimed she was present during the crime, coerced into helping. The public, already on edge from the brutality of the murder, accepted the narrative. The case went to trial. The convictions followed. But beneath the surface, the story never quite settled. None of the physical evidence connected them to the murder. No DNA, no fibers, no reliable eyewitnesses. The so-called trophy denim was a fabrication, cut from an old pair of jeans belonging to a relative of Laverne's. Still, they remained in prison. And then, something even more chilling happened. In 1994, graffiti appeared on the wall of a truck stop bathroom in Livingston, Montana. It wasn't detailed. Just a sentence scrawled in thick black ink. "I killed Taunja Bennett." Next to the words, a crude drawing of a smiley face. The statement seemed like a hoax, until letters began arriving, handwritten, eerie, and laced with a tone of arrogance. The writer claimed responsibility not just for Bennett, but for multiple women. He mocked law enforcement. He ended each letter with the same signature, an unsettling, distorted smile. This was no confession of guilt. It was a declaration of ownership. He had watched from the shadows as two innocent people were blamed for his crime, and it pleased him, because what he wanted most wasn't just to kill. It was to be seen. And so began the legend of the Smiley Face Killer. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. The man behind the letters called himself Keith Jesperson. He was a long-haul truck driver, born in British Columbia, Canada, and raised in the shadow of violence. His father was a heavy drinker, known for outbursts and fists. The household was not a home. It was a battlefield. Jesperson, a child of abnormal size and growing silence, quickly became the target of cruelty, both at school and at home. As he grew, his body became a fortress. By adolescence, he stood taller than his peers, but not stronger in spirit. There was no one to protect him, so he learned to protect himself with distance. Emotionally sealed off, socially isolated, he developed habits that would later seem like red flags in hindsight. He hurt animals. He liked to watch them squirm, then stop moving. When he pushed too far, no one stopped him. His world rewarded silence, and he absorbed the lesson well. Eventually, he found work as a trucker. The road became his ally. It gave him freedom, privacy, and invisibility, perfect conditions for the life he was about to live. In that space between exits, between states, he could become anyone. He could meet women no one would miss, women who lived on the fringes, sex workers, transients, people traveling alone. He saw not their lives, but their vulnerabilities, and he used them. Jesperson's first known victim was Taunja Bennett, though he would later claim she was only the beginning. After her death, he watched with twisted satisfaction as two strangers were convicted for his crime. The attention on them fed something in him, a dark hunger for recognition. But as months passed, and no one connected him to the act, that hunger turned bitter. He hadn't just killed. He had created a narrative. And it had been stolen. That's when the letters began. In them, he described the murders in graphic detail. He made references to events and evidence never released publicly. He signed each one the same way, with a crude, smiley face. Over time, the media gave him a name, the Smiley Face Killer. It was the validation he craved, but even that would not satisfy him for long, because Jesperson was not just a killer. He was a narcissist, wrapped in the skin of a predator. He needed to be feared. He needed to be remembered. The psychological profile that emerged was clear. He was methodical, not impulsive. He didn't kill in fits of rage, but with control. He chose victims who lacked visibility, people whose disappearances wouldn't generate headlines or public outcry. Each act was calculated, not just the murder itself, but what came after. The letters, the symbols, the geographic movement. These were not mistakes. They were part of the plan. Between 1990 and 1995, Jesperson would leave a trail of victims across the United States. Their stories were similar. Each woman was lured into a moment of trust, often inside the cab of his truck, then attacked, raped, and strangled. The act of strangulation was deeply personal, requiring sustained contact, a slowing of breath, the feel of life fading beneath his grip. He preferred it that way. Guns were distant, knives too messy. But strangulation gave him control. He confessed that the moment of death, the precise instant when resistance stopped, was what he lived for. Not the sex, not the aftermath, but that singular moment when he alone decided between life and death. It was power. It was silence. It was the closest thing to peace that he claimed to feel. But even with the bodies piling up, Jesperson remained a ghost. He kept moving, kept working, kept killing. It wasn't until 1995, when Julie Winningham, a former girlfriend, was found dead in Washington, that the facade began to crack. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't disposable. She had friends, family, people who noticed when she disappeared. Her death triggered an investigation that moved differently. This time, police followed the threads carefully. They found her connection to Jesperson. They traced a vehicle sale. They found his name, his job, his route. When detectives brought him in for questioning, he showed no visible signs of panic. He lied. Calmly, consistently, said he'd argued with Julie, that she left the truck alive. He shrugged off the questions. But when he walked out of the station, something shifted. A detective had handed him a business card. A reminder. 1 week later, Jesperson called that number and whispered, "You were right." "I want to confess." It wasn't remorse. It was recognition. His confession began with Julie, but expanded quickly. He spoke of Bennett, then 6 more women. Some had never even been reported missing. His letters had told the truth. He was the man behind the smile. Still, he left much unsaid. Names, dates, motives. Some bodies were never recovered. Others had been misidentified. He didn't seem to care. The important thing, for him, was that now everyone knew. He had always been there, watching, waiting, wanting to be seen. After his confession, Keith Jesperson's name entered public record, but most of his victims did not. Their identities were shadows, barely echoed in court transcripts or police briefings. He had killed across state lines, Oregon, Washington, California, Florida, and in doing so, fragmented the investigations. Different jurisdictions, different missing persons reports. No one had yet connected the dots until Jesperson laid them out. In a letter intercepted before it reached his brother, Jesperson had listed 8 victims. Taunja Bennett was first. Julie Winningham, the most recent. In between were 6 women he claimed to have met, killed and discarded, most often near truck stops or remote roads, where anonymity was as thick as the exhaust smoke. Their names came slowly, if at all. Some were never recovered. Others were discovered months after their deaths, their remains so decomposed that forensic evidence had faded. Jesperson didn't always remember their names. Sometimes he called them by their hair color, or by where he picked them up. A woman in Spokane, another in Riverside, one near Tampa. In his mind, they were moments, not people. That was the cruelty beneath the killings, not just the act itself, but the deliberate erasure. Jesperson didn't just kill to exert control over life. He killed to make these women disappear from the world entirely, as if they had never existed. There were no funerals, no news coverage. Sometimes, no one even reported them missing. He targeted the invisible. People without ties. Women struggling with addiction, homelessness, or mental illness. In some cases, their own families had lost track of them. That was the type he preferred. Not because they were easier to kill, but because they were easier to forget. Strangulation remained his method. It gave him time, control. He often used ligatures, cords, belts, rope. In some cases, he gagged them first, using duct tape or cloth. There was a clinical rhythm to it. Subdue, assault, strangle, dispose. He cleaned the truck. He moved on. By morning, he could be 3 states away. Law enforcement struggled to keep pace. With each murder taking place in a different state, there were no centralized systems to connect the crimes in real time. Jesperson exploited this. He understood the limitations of the system better than most. He relied on it. That's why he kept killing. Eventually, investigators were able to match his DNA to several crime scenes. Evidence long stored away, fibers, bodily fluids, fingerprints, now had a name attached. Jesperson. It was enough for indictments, enough for convictions. But it wasn't enough for closure. He claimed to have killed over 160 people, a number so high, so theatrical, it bordered on fantasy. No evidence supported the claim. But that wasn't the point. Jesperson said it because he knew people would listen, that they would talk about it, that they would write about him. He wasn't just confessing, he was performing. In court, he did not argue. In most states, he entered what's known as an offered plea, a legal maneuver that allows a defendant to maintain innocence while acknowledging the prosecution has enough evidence to convict. It was, for him, a neat compromise. He didn't need to say he was guilty. The system would do it for him. He received multiple life sentences, served concurrently. No possibility of parole. He was sent to Oregon State Penitentiary, the same state where his first victim had been left in the brush, eyes open, mouth frozen in fear. A circle, unintentional, but complete. In prison, Jesperson gave interviews. He described his crimes in detail, calmly, almost academically. He rarely showed emotion. Occasionally, he smiled, not out of joy, but as if to remind listeners who he was. The smiley face remained his symbol, a grotesque parody of innocence, now etched into the darker pages of American criminal history. Years later, attention would turn to John Sosnovska and Laverne Pavlinak, the couple falsely imprisoned for Taunja Bennett's murder. After Jesperson's confession, public pressure mounted. The courts reviewed the evidence. In 1996, the convictions were overturned. The two were released after serving more than 4 years. Wrongfully accused, wrongfully imprisoned. Lives broken by a lie they thought would solve a different problem. Pavlinak had invented the story to escape her abusive relationship. She hadn't anticipated the cost, or that the man she accused would believe it too. The irony was unbearable. She had fabricated a killer to save herself from harm, while the real killer watched and smiled. Jesperson later admitted he found it amusing. The mistake validated him. It proved he had power, not just over his victims, but over the entire system, over judges, over detectives, over the truth itself. What made Keith Jesperson dangerous was not just what he did, but how long he went unnoticed. The space he operated in was vast, And so were the failures that allowed him to remain hidden. He preyed on people who didn't matter to the system. He exploited the silence around them, and he used it to build his own voice, a voice he was never supposed to have, a voice shaped like a smile,